Good afternoon and welcome to the UBC Weekly News Roundup. Today on the 21st of January 2024. My name is Sharon Kyomugisha. We start off today with the Vice President of the Council, Republic of Cuba, Salvador Mesa, who has handed over the chairmanship of the G77 plus China to President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni of Uganda. Salvador assumed the chairmanship of the G77 plus China on January 12, 2023. The G77 plus China summit is composed of 134 member states, representing two-thirds of the United Nations membership and 80% of the world's population. G77 plus China is the largest and most diverse group of the multilateral consultations. Let's have the highlights of the handover, and the President, Museveni, who is made in speech as chair of the G77 plus China, pledged not to leave any person behind because or during his reign of leadership as chairman of the G77 plus China.
Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Denis Francis, President of the 78th session of the UN General Assembly, Her Excellency the Vice President of Uganda, and all other government and party leaders of Uganda, fellow Ugandans, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all to Uganda, the Pearl of Africa, for the third South Summit of the Group of 77 and China. Your personal participation at this summit, which is being held 18 years after the second summit that took place in the state of Qatar in June 2005, demonstrates your commitment to the work of the G77 and China. I commend His Excellency Miguel Mario Diaz-Canel Bermudez, President of the Republic of Cuba, for the exemplary leadership of the G77 and China in 2023. I would like to thank His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamadi Al Thani, Amir of the State of Qatar, for hosting our last summit. The group of 77 developing countries was founded in 1964 at the first session of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD. At the time, these countries were faced with challenges of basic development. It was the first organized effort by the developing countries to unite to steer their countries on the path of the economic development in the unjust world economic order. Building on their joint declaration at the conclusion of the first session of the UNCTAD, these 77 developing countries, at their first ministerial meeting held in Algiers, united by common aspirations, agreed to identify collective interests and to pursue their joint efforts towards economic and social development, peace, and prosperity. This unity within the group has provided it to stay on course to promote and defend its members' collective economic interests at the United Nations. We must continue to embrace the founding principles that gave life to this heterogeneous and representative group of nations. Currently, the population of G77 and China represents 80% of the global population. In addition, its GDP accounts for more than 40% of the global GDP. This shows that in spite of the challenges, the group has registered progress in defending and promoting the interests of the developing countries. Uganda welcomed the theme of the third South Summit of the G77 and China. We meet at the time where the developing countries continue to face multiple global challenges that undermine our national and collective efforts to achieve sustainable development and our national development aspirations. We are now past halfway for the 2030. Unfortunately, the overall progress in the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, as agreed at the heads of states and government and high representatives meeting held at the United Nations in September 2015, falls short of the expectations, with the developing countries lagging far behind. Therefore, this summit is an appropriate forum to speak with a common voice as leaders of the Group of 77 and China on the urgent need for effective actions to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development during the remaining 7 years to realize our vision, shared principles and commitments, particularly the eradication of poverty in all its forms and dimensions, and the pledge that no one will be left behind. Excellencies, setting the path toward the realization of leaving no one behind requires that as a group we remain united in our demand to the international community to support developing countries to urgently address the global challenges, in particular poverty, hunger, digital divide, and climate change. We continue to witness the threat to multilateralism and the rise of unilateralism, which makes all susceptible to the impact of the current unjust international economic order. At the Group of 77 and China, we should continue to work collectively to ensure that we achieve an international economic order that is just and equitable as envisaged 59 years ago at the founding of the group. Uganda remains committed to the pledge to leave no one behind. In this context, Uganda has accelerated its national efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in its entirety. We firmly believe that accelerating our progress towards the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda is critical to our national aspirations to ensure that no one is left behind, particularly during this time when we strive to build back better from the COVID pandemic and respond to other global challenges. Uganda has identified 4 key sectors of wealth creation and job creation that include commercial agriculture, industrialization, the development and modernization of services, and information and communication technology to support our socio-economic transformation. The government of Uganda is implementing targeted interventions in the above key sectors with a view to ensure that no one is left behind. In addition, we are equally prioritizing the promotion and protection of the human rights, including the right to development, in line with our national legal framework and international commitments. We wish to emphasize that the issue of human rights should be handled objectively and not politicized. South-South cooperation continues to play a critical role in supporting development countries in their efforts to achieve self-reliance. In this regard, I commend all developing countries for their contributions in strengthening this element of international cooperation. As countries in the Global South, we need to uphold this solidarity, which is a pillar in helping us safeguard our collective interests. We need to strengthen trade and investments among our countries. Therefore, the African Continental Free Trade Area, CFTA, leads the way to strengthen intra-trade among African countries to ensure prosperity for the African people. As developing countries, we should support the implementation of these regional trade blocs. We must also support strengthening triangular cooperation. Leaving no one behind cannot be realized without adequately addressing the challenges and needs faced by countries in special situations, in particular African countries, least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states, as well as specific challenges faced by many middle-income countries, conflict and post-conflict countries, and countries and peoples living under foreign occupation. These challenges continue to undermine the efforts of these countries to ensure that no one is left behind. In this regard, we support the call for the international community to provide targeted support to enable these countries to address their challenges. We also support the urgent reform of the international financial architecture to ensure that it is fit for purpose to respond to the financing needs of the developing countries. In our view, the international financial institutions and multilateral development banks must support the national priorities of developing countries without any conditionalities that infringe on these countries' sovereignty. Uganda is taking over the chairmanship of the group at an opportune time when we celebrate our 60th anniversary. I thank you all for entrusting Uganda with the chairing of the Group of 77 and China for 2024. We commend the African group for endorsing our candidature for the chairmanship of the Group of 77 and China. 60 years of the existence will continue after 59 years of our group's existence to yearn for a revitalized multilateral system which is capable of adequately addressing current and emerging global challenges. We firmly believe that multilateralism remains a fundamental and crucial mechanism for addressing our common challenges together as nations in solidarity. Uganda's chairmanship will strive to further promote acceleration of the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, scaling up action to address climate change and biodiversity loss, strengthening international tax cooperation, financing for development, fight against illicit financial flows, and strengthening digital cooperation among others. This year, 2024, is a crucial year with various intergovernmental processes at the United Nations on issues that are of paramount importance for the group. These include the inter alia Fourth International Conference for the Small Island Developing States, Third UN Conference on the Landlocked Developing Countries, ECOSOC, Economic and Social Council, Forum for Financing for Development Follow-up, ECOSOC, Economic Social Council High Political Forum on Sustainable Development, the Summit of the Future, Fourth International Conference on the Financing for Development, and 2024 UN Climate Change Conference, all of which demand that we as the group remain even more steadfast in promoting the interests of developing countries. Uganda therefore commits itself to consolidate the unity, to work for the consolidation of the unity, presence, and influence of the group in these intergovernmental processes. In this regard, we look forward to working closely together with all the members of the group in this endeavor. In conclusion, it is critical that the Group of 77 and China remains united in its pursuit of collective interests at the United Nations. In the intergovernmental processes at the United Nations, we must ensure that priorities of the group are promoted and defended. I assure you that our team, led by the permanent representative in New York, has my full support to chair the Group of 77 and China. It is our sincere hope that our chairmanship will be an invaluable new step to the path toward the realization of our aspirations as developing countries. I thank you. Thank you so much.
That was President Yoweri Museveni, who has taken over as the chairman of the G77 plus China, and he took over from the vice president of the Council of Cuba, Salvador Mesa. In more stories, the outgoing chairman of the G77 plus China and deputy president of the Council Republic of Cuba, Salvador Mesa, argued that the incoming chairman of the G77 plus China, President Yoweri Museveni, should remain focused on consolidating the unity, presence, influence and leadership of the group in the multiple and relevant multilateral processes, in particular the SDG Summit, the Ministerial Preparatory Meeting for the Summit of the Future, the COP28 on Climate Change and the Third South Summit. Salvador also reminded the new chairman of the G77 plus China to put emphasis on science, technology and innovation for quality education, an agenda that was brought into context by the G77 plus China Education Ministers meeting held in Havana, Cuba on February 2nd, 2023. However, Salvador applauded President Museveni for his role in ensuring peace and stability on the African continent. And let's take a look at Salvador's handover speech.
I would particularly like to acknowledge the leadership of President Yoweri Museveni, promoter of peace and stability in Africa and the world. Your Excellencies, in these challenging times, when many tactics deployed to divide the countries of the South, unity should be the order of the day for the G77 and China. It is essential and urgent for us to work effectively and together to change the current unfair world order and free ourselves from the disadvantaged positions that are a byproduct of centuries of colonialism, neo-colonialism, and dependence once and for all. 2023 was a year of great challenges and complex processes that proved how much we can accomplish when we work decisively in defense of our legitimate interests and aspirations. Thanks to the collective efforts of the members of our group, we managed to move forward on the path towards where we deserve and need to be given the current international context. The successful summit of heads of state and government of the G77 and China, which was held last September in Havana, was a necessary and urgent meeting out of which we emerged stronger. The summit of our leaders in the context of the 28th Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Climate Change, or COP28, for the first time, for the first time, will set an important precedent for the future work of the G77 as regards international climate negotiations. The group has also been a key player in different UN negotiations, including those on sustainable development. It has also been involved in preparations for the Summit of the Future. The positions of the G77 have made a significant contribution to the adoption of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and the sustainable use of marine biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Cuba's leadership of the G77 and China in several international meetings outside of the group's traditional scope, such as the Summit for a New Global Financial Pact and the BRICS Summit, have allowed us to make the interests of the developing world heard in these critical fora. We would like to thank the group's members for their active and constructive participation in the different events held in Cuba last year, especially at the ministerial meetings on education, culture, tourism, and the environment. Said meetings fostered substantive debates and agreements on practical actions having to do with issues of fundamental importance for the South. We invite you to continue to work in concert on the implementation of the 17 projects designed during our presidency for the benefit of our members. Likewise, we should continue to give impetus to the G77 NAM Joint Coordination Committee, which will make our South-led proposals more coherent and efficient. Uganda's presidency of both groups this year is a step in that direction. In short, 2023 was a year of commendable collective action, which produced undeniable results, and we thank you all. Excellencies, honorable delegates, as regards our contribution to this discussion and to properly follow up on the issues covered at the G77 summit held in Havana last September, allow me to list some of our proposals for practical action your delegations may want to consider. We feel that they will help us achieve our objectives. Number one, present a draft resolution to the UN General Assembly before the end of the year on behalf of the G77 member states and China, a resolution to propose a meeting, a high-level meeting on science, technology, and innovation. This meeting should agree on practical steps forwards to guarantee that science, technology, and innovation contribute to accelerating progress towards full application of 2030 Agenda and the Addis Ababa Action Plan. Number two, to hold a meeting of ministers and high authorities of science, technology, and innovation of our group in the first half of 2025. The objective of this meeting would be to identify the main proposals that the G77 and China would put forth at said high-level meeting of the UN General Assembly.
The President of the United Nations General Assembly, Dennis Francis, has decried the humanitarian catastrophe in the Gaza Strip, suffering of the children, 10,000 that are dying. Speaking at the G77 plus China Handover Chairmanship Summit to President Sharon Museveni, Dennis also said that the world is seeking for answers from the United Nations about the Gaza genocide, but in vain. Dennis told the summit of heads of states from the G77 plus China summit that he's counting on their support and leadership of President Museveni as chairman of the group to help him in building bridges of dialogue in addressing the Gaza humanitarian catastrophe for all. Dennis told the summit of G77 plus China that it has a pivotal role to play in shaping the new world order.
Let me begin by conveying my sincere appreciation to His Excellency President Museveni and to the government of Uganda for hosting this third South Summit, a momentous event highlighting the unshakable commitment of the G77 and China to advancing multilateralism and global cooperation as the centerpiece for achieving the noble goals of the United Nations. Uganda's assumption of the chairmanship coincides with the group's 60th anniversary. I have no doubt that with such capable leadership, Uganda will confidently carry forth the torch of leadership for a prosperous, united, and stronger South. I should also like to recognize and commend the outgoing dynamic chair, Cuba, for its extraordinary and insightful leadership of the group during these trying times of geopolitical tensions and multifaceted challenges. Excellencies, our world is confronted by a confluence of crises, from the lingering impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic to rising inflation, from a worsening crisis of debt distress to the harsh realities of climate change, which for many, especially the most vulnerable, is a real existential threat. In parallel, escalating geopolitical tensions, wars, and conflicts have risen to the fore, shattering the lives of millions and putting the safety and security of the entire planet at risk. At the forefront of these is the harrowing humanitarian catastrophe in the Gaza Strip. Generations of families suffering irreparable trauma and loss. Children undergoing amputations without anesthesia. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble in one fell swoop. With half the population facing starvation, and tens of thousands dead in just over 100 days, the world is looking to the United Nations for answers. The General Assembly has not sat idly in the face of this crisis. It has been both active and ambitious, often led by this very group of member states. It has demanded an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, for all parties to comply with their obligations under international law, and for the immediate release of all hostages and humanitarian access. I assure you that I shall not tire of reiterating these urgent demands, and I will do so for as long as it takes. I count on the collective leadership of this group to do the same. In tandem, we are witnessing mounting frustration with and the complete rejection of an unjust world order which continuously relegates the interests of the Global South to the margins of the international community's lists of priorities. Now more than ever, the G77 and all nations must come together and build bridges of dialogue, hope, and cooperation to create a more fair, more just, and more prosperous world for all. Your presence here today as leaders of the Global South underscores the fact that the Group of 77 and China, as the largest and most diverse group in the United Nations, has a pivotal role to play in shaping a new world order that is more inclusive and leaves no one and no country behind. While our challenges today are profound and perverse, the reality is that we have been struggling for quite some time. Several developing countries had already veered off course in their pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals, even prior to the pandemic and the extant conflicts we see today. Not surprisingly, the most vulnerable of our societies have borne the brunt of these adverse external events, with countless pushed back into hunger and poverty. And environmental emergencies, including climate change, have only grown in severity and impact year on year without robust and adequate climate action for course correction. Against this backdrop, our cherished multilateral system, the policy apparatus for problem-solving international cooperation, is facing an acute crisis, with legitimate questions of current relevance and credibility arising and intensifying time and again.
Moving on from that, Antonio Olivier Guterres has told the G77 plus China heads of state summit convening in the capital, Kampala, that the United Nations Security Council needs to be reformed. Guterres said the current composition of the UN Security Council doesn't reflect global fairness. Guterres also said that the UN is relying on the G77 plus China to offer global solutions in resolving the needs of developing countries.
I thank the government of Uganda for its hospitality and congratulate it on the leadership of the G77 plus China. 60 years ago, recognizing the need for unity and solidarity in the face of common challenges, the G77 was born. Over the decades, you have been an engine for South-South cooperation and development, lifted millions of people out of poverty, and provided a powerful voice for developing countries on the global stage. Today, you are the largest grouping of the Global South, representing 80% of the world's population. And your solidarity and partnership are essential to building a sustainable, peaceful, and just world for all. A world in which the United Nations Charter, international law, and human rights prevail in global relations. Excellencies, halfway to the 2030 deadline for the Sustainable Development Goals, far from leaving no one behind, we are leaving half the world behind. Progress on poverty and hunger is stalling, and in some countries going into reverse. Many G77 members are grappling with an economic hangover from the COVID-19 pandemic, crippling debts, a cost of living crisis, and sky borrowing costs. Hundreds of millions of people around the world, particularly women and girls, are living without the most basic respect for their human rights, and the lack of jobs is generating enormous frustration among young people. Climate disasters, most of you did little to create, are knocking chunks out of your economies and increasing people's suffering. investment in sustainable development and climate action is slipping further out of reach. And while South-South cooperation is strong and deepening, it does not replace the need for the respect of the commitment of the global North, for sustained engagement to reduce poverty and inequality, support growth, and build resilience in developing countries. Digital technologies have enormous potential for good, but they are also inflaming inequalities. The International Monetary Fund warns that artificial intelligence could make things even worse. And peace, the foundation of sustainable development, is breaking down amidst a climate of global impunity. Around the world, from Sudan to Ukraine, the Middle East and beyond, wars are devastating lives, fueling mass movements of people, disrupting global supply chains, and threatening to set entire regions alight. In Gaza, Israel's military operations have spread massive destruction and killed civilians on a scale unprecedented during my time as Secretary General, including more than 150 members of our own staff, following the horrific terror attacks by Hamas on 7 October. This is heartbreaking and utterly unacceptable. The Middle East is a tinderbox. We must do all we can to prevent conflict igniting across the region. And that starts with an immediate humanitarian ceasefire to relieve the suffering in Gaza, allow humanitarian aid to reach everyone in need, and facilitate the release of hostages, which should be immediate and unconditional. The repeated refusal yesterday to accept the two-state solutions for Israeli and Palestinians is totally unacceptable, as I told the summit of the non-aligned movement. The denial of the right to statehood for the Palestinian people would indefinitely prolong a conflict that has become a major threat to global peace and security, exacerbate polarization, and embolden extremists everywhere. Excellencies, righting our troubled world depends on effective global action. Yet the international system is out of date, out of time, and out of step, reflecting a bygone age when many of your countries were still colonized. The United Nations Security Council is paralyzed by geopolitical divisions, and its composition does not reflect the reality of today's world. It must be reformed. And the global financial system, including the Bretton Woods institutions, have failed to provide a global safety net for developing countries in distress, as it was created after the Second World War in a totally different global economic situation. Yet, amidst all this gloom, there is hope. Last year, the SDG Summit issued a strong political declaration thanks in large part to the advocacy and tenacity of G77 countries. And this year, we have an opportunity to build on that success. The Summit of the Future, to be held in New York in September, is a generational opportunity. It aims to reform and revitalize multilateralism so that it works for everyone, everywhere, and meets the challenges of today. It is a chance to create the conditions for countries to achieve the SDGs, to find consensus on frameworks to address new challenges, and to build a better world for us all. We rely on the G77 plus China to make the Summit of the Future a success, to seize this opportunity and to find common solutions. The Summit will consider deep reforms of the international financial architecture. Financial institutions and frameworks created after the Second World War still largely correspond to the power relations and the global economy of that time. They must be reformed so that they are truly universal, reflect with justice the realities of today, and are much more responsive to the needs of developing countries. I have also proposed an SDG stimulus of $500 billion a year in affordable long-term finance for sustainable development and climate action in developing countries. And multilateral development banks must be adequately capitalized and must change their business models to leverage far more private finance for developing countries at reasonable costs. The SDG stimulus calls for urgent action on debt, including breathing space for countries facing unbearable repayment schedules. And it calls for the expansion of the contingency financing for countries in need, including through the rechanneling of special drawing rights. Momentum is building. All countries backed these proposals in the SDG summit last year, but now we must turn them into reality. So, Excellencies, beyond the summit of the future, I ask you to unite against climate catastrophe. The very existence of some countries in this room depends on limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, in line with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in light of different national circumstances. I urge you to hold developed countries to account for climate justice and for leading an equitable and just transition based on the phase-out of fossil fuels and massive investment in renewable energy. All financial commitments must be met. Clarifying the delivery of the $100 billion and doubling adaptation finance by 2025 are only starting points. The Loss and Damage Fund is a step forward and a testament to the power of the Global South. But we must call for meaningful contributions that have not yet been announced. And we must also advocate for an ambitious new finance goal for the future at COP29. And we must not forget that the just and equitable energy transition includes producing and trading critical minerals in a way that is fair, sustainable, and provides maximum benefit to developing countries. They must be more than simple exporters of raw materials. Excellencies, new technologies can turbocharge progress towards the SDGs. Our proposed Global Digital Compact aims to ensure that in a new technological era, no one is left behind. And I hope it will be agreed at the Summit of the Future. And the high-level body on artificial intelligence that I created, which includes several experts from G77 countries, and is balanced 50% North and 50% South, has already made preliminary recommendations on global artificial intelligence governance, including with the objective of accelerating the Sustainable Development Goals. The new Scientific Advisory Board is also working to ensure scientific breakthroughs are shared equally for the benefit of all. And I praise the efforts done by the Presidency of Cuba to put science and technology in the center of G77 concerns. I encourage you to engage in all these efforts.
That was the UN Secretary General Guterres Olivier, who was addressing people at the G77 plus China Heads of State Summit. Now, the Vice President of the State Council of China, His Excellency Lu Guozong, has reiterated China's support to South-South cooperation. Lu told the G77 plus China Summit that China will stand and work together with the G77 member states and contribute to the current development of countries in the Global South in pursuing Chinese modernization.
Investment globally in the past decade since its launch. The GDI has generated more than 10 international cooperation platforms in its 8 priority areas and over 200 cooperation projects on the ground. Working closely with 20 international organizations, China has implemented over 130 trilateral cooperation projects in nearly 60 countries in areas such as poverty reduction, food security, public health, and climate change. More than 30 million people have benefited from these projects. And the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development received a good boost. President Xi Jinping has underlined that China as a developing country and one of the global south, has invariably stood in solidarity with fellow developing countries through thick and thin. China will continue to take South-South cooperation as a priority in its cooperation with other countries, stand together and work in concert with G77 members, and contribute to the common development of countries of the South with its philosophy and progress in pursuing Chinese modernization. Thank you.
That's all we had for you this afternoon. Stay tuned for more programming coming your way, and of course more updates about the G77 plus China summit. My name is Sharon Kyomugisha. Have a good afternoon.
It's super fast internet. Oh, it's a super camera. It's a super battery.
Fun battery phone.
Yeah, it's a super deal. Get the Capote Super from MTN now at a reduced initial deposit of only 49,000 shillings and pay the balance in Pola for as low as 833 shillings per day. Grab this Super Capote deal and get 2 GB of free MTN data every month for 8 months. Get the Capote Super now from any MTN shop countrywide. Everywhere you go, MTN. Regulated by UCC.
Irritations? No more rashes and irritations. Movit Herbal Jelly and Herbal Soap is rich in natural herbs for a smooth and glowing skin.
Movit all day confidence.
The energy of this land comes to life in dreams and memories. It lights up in these nights and leads us towards new horizons. It was born in the hearts of these men, of these women. The energy of this land comes from here. It comes from Africa, and it vibrates in each of us.
I'm powered by Africa.
Oryx service stations, powered by Africa.
When it is KB o'clock, you need more from your voice bundles. That's why MTN is offering you more minutes across all networks that don't ache